From rising temperatures to shifting ecosystems, the urgency of climate action cannot be ignored. I would now like to invite Mmridula Ramesh, award-winning author and founder of the Sundaram Climate Institute and an investor in climate tech startups in India. Welcome, Mridula.
Okay. Thank you, Preeta. Thank you to the Indiaspora team for inviting me. I'd like to start with something that's going on right now. You know, when the Strait of Hormuz shuts, the world stops. And that brings up the concept of a choke point or a bottleneck. Anyone who's done an MBA will remember Herbie from their operations class. Choke points or bottlenecks are basically, processes that limit the speed at which an overall process moves. And when they're closed, they prevent action. What's really interesting is climate action has choke points too. But because they've dispersed, when one blocks up, it's not as immediately dramatic as Hormuz. These dispersed choke points hide inside muddied incentives, within how things are procured, in how subsidies flow, and sometimes in inaccessible satellite imagery. And when they close, they prevent or delay climate action, meaning the world dies from 1,000 paper cuts. For India especially, that's a problem. Let's be clear, the climate has changed. And for those who don't believe me, there is an El Nino, super El Nino in the works, looks like this year. So we can talk again at the end of the year to show you exactly how the climate has changed. And India is one of the most vulnerable countries to this warming climate, needs to focus more, as even one earlier speaker said, on adaptation. The tragedy is India has made significant and meaningful strides in mitigation, that is getting at the carbon intensity of its GDP down. But its strides that it's taken in adaptation have been far patchier. And why is that? The constraint is not a lack of solutions or a shortage of ideas. Look, I've spent the last 10 years investing in some of these adaptation-based solutions. So they exist, and there are hundreds more waiting in the wings. But what's preventing from a climate adaptation startup from scaling as fast as, say, a solar power producer? I would argue it's a shortage of a clear signal. And that's where AI can matter. Some say, look, we already have ML, we have data systems, what can AI add? 4 things. First, it's granularity at the scale at which warnings actually matter. A legacy data system would tell you, look, there's 250 millimeters of rainfall, for example, that fell over Mumbai on August 21st last year. It can say, look, on average, a meter of rainfall fell in August over the last 10 years. That's historically interesting, but operationally completely useless. What saves lives is knowing where and when 450 millimeters of rainfall will fall in the next 24 hours. AI models, climate models operating at local scale, where they combine satellite data, historical rainfall data, terrain, drainage, real-time feeds, can provide the kind of warning that tells you where exactly storm drains need to be in pristine condition and which streets the people need to be evacuated. Efforts that are so targeted that action becomes less expensive, and that means they actually happen. The second way in which AI can help is timing. Existing records can show a farmer what and when you sowed last year or in the last 10 years. But AI can tell you what and when to sow this year, combining insights from disparate models like soil moisture, forecasted rainfall, how mandi prices will behave. For example, if fertilizer is going to be short and everybody in your vicinity is planting rice, are you better off going for planting millet? And oh, by the way, here are 3 procurement agencies and the numbers you can contact. And by the way, would you like me to draft an email or a WhatsApp message for that? The difference between a historical record and a decision support system is the difference between a mirror and a map. Third, this again, other people have brought up, synthesis across systems, right? The kind of problems, the wicked climate, especially adaptation problems, like stubble burning, water depletion, how do we deal with crop stress, the data for these live across different systems that don't talk to each other. AI, the ability of AI to read across these systems simultaneously and find the pattern is really, really useful. And fill in the gaps intelligently. Well, not always intelligently, but for the most part, to help make better decisions. And lastly, this is probably the most important. AI can help political leaders and investors understand where exactly to deploy political and financial capital. Look, there's no use pretending that a lot of these adaptation solutions do require political capital to be spent, and that's not infinite. So AI can take that data and say, look, which fight is actually winnable, in which district at which moment. And that's a question of signal. And today, a lot of political leaders are operating on somewhat of a weak signal, aggregate statistics, anecdotal reports, and intuition. And that's where AI can make a difference. Let me sort of look at one or two examples depending on time to show you what I mean. One thing, a wicked problem is stubble burning, right? Every October to November, the satellite images, the firm's data from NASA shows this bright red wash in the northwest of India. The op-eds come alive. There's the same almost tired, predictable measures to try and counteract the pollution while the air remains solid gray. The problem is we're treating this as an enforcement problem. Farmers are burning illegally, so stop them. But what if this is an incentive problem? The farmer who's burning is making a perfectly rational decision. The relevant data is sitting in silos. Satellite data that shows who's burning, subsidy records that show who's getting free fertilizer and free electricity, procurement data that shows which farmers are selling to FCI through which mandi at what price, soil health cards that show you where the soil is depleted, data sitting in these little cooperatives showing you where is the machinery really required and where it's not enough. Machinery like happy seeders, right, which help farmers sow through the stubble so they don't have to clear the stubble to plant the wheat crop. But none of these talk to each other, right? And they're all sitting hidden somewhere. But if you connect them and say, look, this farmer has been burning for 3 years running. He looks like he's setting his field on fire again, but he's continuing to receive these subsidies and he sells via this mandi to the FCI at this price. His neighbor has stopped burning this year, but he can't rent this happy seeder because it's not available in his village, right? There's a farmer in UP who's not burnt at all, who's doing everything that he's asked, but his grain is not procured. You've changed the conversation immediately. You've stopped designing punishments for the symptom and you've started designing incentives. You've started designing interventions to change the incentives. You've started, this kind of decision helps you decide who to buy from, linking subsidies to good behavior, directing missionary hiring online to high burn clusters, directing political capital, and that's required, to exactly where it's needed the most. You think the intervention, think needle, not sledgehammer. And that makes action actually possible. Guys, do I have a time to run through another example or should we close?
You can, Mridula, because this is your time.
Okay. The second example, and this is a startup I've invested in, it has to do with sugarcane. Like sugarcane has an unsavory reputation period. It's thought of as a water guzzler that destroys the climate resilience of a region. But here's something most people don't get. Sugarcane can cope with extra water, but it doesn't need it. It's a flood-resistant crop. It's not a water-hungry crop. But when water is effectively free in Indian agriculture, the rational decision is to overuse it, right? And it has consequences like soil degrades, you deplete all the water table, and importantly, you generate a lot more methane from the flooded fields. But here's the killer. It reduces the yield of the sugarcane. So there is a company, Cultivate, which I've invested in, which has shown at scale that by placing soil, these moisture sensors and using a little bit of AI to understand how to operate the irrigation pump sets that give the plant only what it wants at the time it wants it, the farmer can simultaneously increase his yield while dramatically cutting the water consumption. And this has been shown at scale. You would think it's an easy sell, right? but it's not. The startup is struggling to scale because water is free. So the saving is invisible to the farmer. So he has to the startup markets it as a labor selling innovation. And that's a much harder sell. And farmers tend to be wary because what if this new contraption makes their crops wither because it's cutting down water so much? The only way this can scale, in my opinion, is if we make water valuable. And that's not by pricing water, because I don't think that's going to happen. The the solution is to generate carbon credits, right? Because when you cut down the water, you're cutting down the methane, and that should give rise to you're saving carbon. So we should open the door to carbon credits. But here's the bottleneck. Securing carbon credit means verification. It needs high quality data. It needs continuous online data in a manner that suits the auditors, verifiers, etc., and gets a buyer to bite. So by connecting the sensor data to satellite moisture data, Mandi records, and calculations of how methane is reduced in an online fashion, this is turning this disparate data into output that a buyer can trust and a bank can finance. The startup that I refer to is trying to do this, and hopefully it will work. Look, to sum up, India's solution is not ideas. Ideas exist. People understand the context in which it's located, etc. It's very different, as others have mentioned, from the West. The problem is these hundreds of little bottlenecks that are scattered across these systems. And if we can use AI, right, to identify these bottlenecks and unblock them at source and stop wasting resources trying to treat the symptom, we can really make significant progress, and AI can help. And as many have said, let's not greenwash over AI's energy requirement or water requirement. This is really a big deal. So for the startups that I look to invest in, I'm like, don't put AI first. If you're using AI intelligently to uncover bottlenecks, material science, of course, as the previous speaker said, is a huge opportunity. But use AI selectively because it can add real value, but only when it's used properly. Thank you.
Mridula, thank you so much. Can you take one question, please?
Sure.
Okay. So the question is, when you say there's a shortage of clear climate signals in India, is the gap more about data availability, data quality, or interpretation, and where can AI intervene most effectively?
No, the issue is really, there's a shortage of both political capital and financial capital, right? So for instance, let me get back to that Bombay example, or Chennai, because I understand it better. If you say, look, there is this northeast monsoon is coming, so Chennai is going to get flooded. Let's just clear everything and clear all the encroachments, etc. It's not going to happen. Okay, it's just going to remain on paper. But if we can use AI and say, look, these two streets are the real bottleneck, right? This particular drain and this encroachment feeding this lake, this tiny stretch of 10 meters is where you need to get the encroachments out. It's two huts. It's not a neighborhood, right? Once you pinpoint it, which you can do, that's when, you're now going with a needle. You're not going with a sledgehammer. And that the political capital required to remove two huts, and you can do it very humanely, because resettling two huts is very different from resettling a neighborhood. Sometimes you have to resettle a neighborhood, but not all the time.
Thank you. And I think the same person had a corollary to their question. And if AI is helping us detect weak climate signals, how do we ensure those signals actually translate into timely action rather than just better predictions? Possible?
Well, I mean, to some extent, India is already doing it, right? I was in Odisha just now, and Odisha, without AI, in 1999, they got decimated by a cyclone. And the geography of Odisha is such that every cyclone will, it's a very high, it's a cyclone hotspot. And through earlier prediction, you don't need predictions 6 months out. What you need is good predictions 3 days out, 2 days out, and then coordination with the disaster prevention agencies, state agencies, etc. And what, to me, always, you focus on the bottleneck, and this is something I learned from manufacturing, that it just unblocks the system. And we spend far too much time treating the symptom and not the cause. And I think AI can help unpack the causes in the examples I gave.
Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to my colleague Preeta.